Headlines: a Malaysian airliner crashes in eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board. U.S. authorities say a surface-to-air missile hit the Boeing 777. Korea says it's opening up its rice market starting next year. Major farmers groups slammed the decision, saying the government has failed to listen to their demands. And North Korea threatens to reconsider participating in the upcoming Asian Games to be held in South Korea. Hello, everybody. Welcome to ARIRANG News in Seoul. I am Kang Tae-ri. Our top story this evening, of course, a Malaysia Airlines passenger plane that was carrying close to 300 people was shot down over eastern Ukraine, killing all those on board. And for more on this story, we are joined by Paul E. from the News Center. Paul, are investigators any closer to determining who caused this fully packed jetliner to fall out of the sky?
Well, U.S. officials suspect pro-Russian separatists are responsible for the alleged attack and believe that the evidence so far shows that flight MH17 was shot out of the sky by a sophisticated surface-to-air missile. This as an unverified audio source has been released, linking the Ukrainian rebels with the Russian military following the deadly crash. But as our Shin Se-min reports, the investigation is just getting started.
A Malaysia Airlines aircraft bound for Kuala Lumpur from Amsterdam was shot down near Ukraine's border with Russia on Thursday, killing all 298 people on board. U.S. intelligence officials have confirmed that a ground-to-air missile brought down the plane, although it's still not clear who fired it.
With respect to the Malaysia Airlines disaster today in Ukraine, I'm closely monitoring the reports. There is a clear need, a full and transparent international investigation. For the moment, I offer my deep condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims and people of Malaysia.
Ukraine's intelligence agency has since released audio of a purported telephone conversation between pro-Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine. They are heard talking about the downed jet and seemed confused about the presence of a passenger plane in the airspace above them. The tape has not been independently verified, but it has added credence to suspicions that rebel forces are to blame.
We do not exclude the possibility that this plane was also shot down and stressed that Ukrainian armed forces did not perform any actions to fire at targets in the air.
In this regard, I want to emphasize that this tragedy would not have happened if there were peace on that land, and in any case, if the military activities had not resumed in the southeast of Ukraine.
More than half of the passengers on Flight 17 were Dutch nationals. The identities of 41 passengers have yet to be verified. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Well, needless to say that this is truly a tragic end to so many lives. Authorities are still confirming the passenger list, but early reports said many of them were part of groups heading on vacation with young children. Paul, what about the families of the victims? Where are they now?
Well, the Malaysian carrier has offered to take the families and the relatives of the passengers to the site of the crash. Hundreds have flown to Kiev, while others, including close to the crew, gathered in Kuala Lumpur, where they were briefed by transport and airline officials.
And of course, this is the second time in less than 5 months that Malaysia Airlines has faced this kind of disaster. There was a Flight 370, which literally vanished in March, and now the downing of Flight 17 with nearly 300 people on board.
That's right. Flight 370 remains missing to this day, with no signs of the wreckage and more questions than answers about its ultimate fate. Our Kim Min-ji has more on the recent tragedies and even another from more than 30 years ago that holds eerie similarities.
It is with intense regret that Malaysia Airlines announces and confirms that we've received notification from the Ukrainian air traffic control that we lost contact with the aircraft MH17 at 14:15 GMT.
In the span of less than 5 months, some 530 people have been killed while flying on Malaysia Airlines planes. It puts the future of the company in question. Even before Flight 370 went missing in March, the airliner was in a shaky financial state and ticket sales have plummeted since. The successive disasters are sure to taint the image of the company. The crisis also brings to mind a similar attack from 3 decades earlier. In 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 bound for Seoul from New York was shot down by a Soviet fighter plane, killing all 269 people on board. The attack came during the peak of the Cold War and further heightened tensions between the West and the Soviet Union. The Korean airliner was shot down after being mistaken as a reconnaissance plane. The downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 and the death of nearly 300 innocent lives appears to also be the result of tensions between states. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
And moving on to other stories today, another setback in inter-Korean relations, and it came in the form of North Korean delegation storming out of the room. We're talking about how Thursday's working-level talks intended to discuss the details of North Korea's participation in the upcoming Asian Games in South Korea came to an end yesterday. And on this Friday, the North is accusing the South of acting in bad faith. Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
North Korea threatened Friday to reconsider its decision to participate in the upcoming Incheon Asian Games, pinning the failure of Thursday's working-level talks squarely on the South. Through its state-run Korean Central News Agency Friday, the North criticized the South Korean delegation for what it called an insincere attitude in the latter half of the meeting, claiming it came under the directive of the presidential office of Cheongwade. It accused the South of taking issue with the number of North Korean cheerleaders and the size of the North Korean flag that would be used during the Games. Should Seoul maintain such a stance, Pyongyang threatened to reconsider its plans to participate in the sporting event. South Korea's Unification Ministry expressed deep regrets about North Korea's angry outburst and called for Pyongyang to return to talks with sincerity. The two Koreas met at the border village of Panmunjom on Thursday to discuss the details of the 700 North Korean athletes and cheerleaders that were planning to make the trip south for the Incheon Asian Games, which begin in September. But when South Korea asked for more details on its plans and said it would accommodate the North Korean delegation just as it would any other team that's participating in the Games, North Korea walked away, questioning Seoul's motives. The two sides have not set a date for their next meeting. While some experts had hoped the Asian Games could become a platform for improved inter-Korean ties, Thursday's meeting shows that the two sides still remain far apart. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
And staying with North Korea, the United Nations Security Council has denounced North Korea's recent series of short-range ballistic missile tests. Officials say the fact that the Security Council has even addressed this issue shows how seriously the international community views this situation. Choi Yoo-sun reports.
Following a closed-door meeting on Thursday, the United Nations Security Council called on North Korea to stop its recent series of short-range ballistic missile tests.
The members of the Security Council condemned these launches as violations of Security Council resolutions 1718 in 2006, 1874, 2009, 2087, 2013 and 2094, 2013, and urged the DPRK to fully comply with the relevant Security Council resolutions.
The Council's condemnation comes after Pyongyang launched 3 rounds of Scud short-range ballistic missiles between June 29th and July 13th toward the East Sea off the Korean peninsula. For conducting 3 nuclear tests and repeatedly testing its short to long-range ballistic missiles since 2006, North Korea has been banned by the UN from any type of ballistic missile or nuclear-related activity. The Council had previously released a statement denouncing the North's medium-range Nodong missile launch in March. South Korean officials say it's very unusual for the Security Council to discuss the regime's short-range missile testing.
It's meaningful that the Council and not the North Korea Sanctions Committee discussed the issue after recognizing that the frequent short-range missiles on the Korean peninsula were threatening international peace and security.
Pyongyang is expected to protest the latest statement out of the United Nations. In response to the statement in March, North Korea threatened to carry out what it called a new form of nuclear test. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
North Korea is entering into a contract with an international organization not as a violator of another UN resolution, but as a member that vows to combat money laundering and terror-related financing. The Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering, or also called APG, approved North Korea's application to be an observer on this Thursday. The North has agreed to abide by the entry conditions, but will be under close observation for 3 years to see if it follows its commitments. If it does, it will then be eligible for full membership. Some have questioned North Korea's intentions about joining this organization. Established back in 1997, the APG consists of 41 member countries.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol has stressed the importance of the central bank's independence, autonomy in deciding the key rate as it counters growing pressure to make a cut. His remark comes just a day after newly appointed Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan hinted his support for a rate cut to spur economic growth. During a meeting with the heads of local banks today, Governor Lee Ju-yeol said a rate decision should be made by the Bank of Korea's Monetary Policy Committee. The central bank recently trimmed the country's growth outlook for this year to 3.8% from an earlier 4%, blaming the April ferry disaster, which dampened domestic demand and damaged the Consumer Sentiment Index. The Korean government says it's opening up its rice market starting next year. It was a decision that came after much deliberation and has been met with fierce resistance from farmers' unions in this country. Hwang Jae has the details.
Korea will open its rice market next year. Agriculture Minister Lee Dong-pil said Friday that it's simply too costly to import more rice, which was the trade-off for postponing rice market liberalization. Korea promised to open up its rice market under a 1994 agreement with the World Trade Organization, but because rice is a Korean staple food, the country was allowed to push back the date for 20 years in exchange for gradually raising its rice import quota. That extension is set to expire at the end of this year.
The import quota of over 400,000 tons this year, which makes up 9% of the nation's total rice consumption based on 2013, is a heavy burden on the nation's overall rice market, especially when rice consumption continues to drop in Korea.
While the government says it will protect the domestic market by imposing high tariffs on foreign rice, it did not provide specific numbers. Pundits are expecting the tariff rate to fall at around 400%. They say that level of tariff would ensure that Korean rice maintains its price competitiveness against Chinese or American rice, which can cost half the price or even less. The government also laid out plans to support the nation's rice industry through an insurance program meant to stabilize rural household incomes. Korean farmers, however, on Friday continued a massive protest that began the day before. They said they intended to protect the nation's food sovereignty that the government seems to have handed away.
The government is giving our jar of rice to the U.S. and China or other countries that are rich in grain. This will never guarantee the food security of Koreans.
The government plans to set the nation's tariff rate on rice and have it verified by the WTO by this September. It said it will work hard to gain full understanding from local farmers about the change. 황지혜, 아리랑 뉴스.
South Korea and China are making slow but steady progress in their bilateral free trade negotiations. Our Song Ji-san has more on Seoul and Beijing's 12th round of negotiations held this past week.
South Korea and China have been working to draw up a free trade deal for more than 2 years now, and the two sides are drawing closer to an agreement.
We have made notable progress in this round of negotiations. We have reached an agreement in principle on market liberalization in the service and investment sectors.
The two sides agreed to start with a positive list approach, in which they will list items and areas to be liberalized, and then switch to a negative list approach within a certain period of time. In a negative list agreement, all items and services are liberalized with the exception of those named. It represents the first time Beijing has agreed to this approach. As for products and sensitive agriculture industry, the two sides are still narrowing differences, but Seoul is firm that it won't allow cheaper Chinese products to take hold of the domestic market.
When we moved into the second stage of the FTA talks, we were sure that we could protect our agricultural sector by including the majority of our products in the extremely sensitive list. China, on the other hand, wants steel and machineries included in the list.
The two sides were eager to make progress at these negotiations, the first since Presidents Park Geun-hye and Xi Jinping agreed in summit talks early this month to finalize a bilateral trade pact by the end of this year. The next round of negotiations is set for September in China. Song Ji-sun, 아리랑 뉴스, 세종.
The number of inbound flights into Korea continues to go up. The Transport Ministry says more than 300,000 flights landed in Korea in the first half of the year, the highest figure ever for that period, and a 6% jump on year. The hike is due in part to the rising number of Chinese visitors to the country. Inbound flights from China were up 17% on year from January to June. The number of flights from overseas into Korea has been on a steady rise over the past 10 years, with the exception of 2005 and 2009, when global financial factors kept the figures low. Now, many of our viewers will have heard of Pororo and/or larva, but if you haven't, you will soon. Korea's most popular animated cartoon characters are winning over countless young fans around the world and are taking home plenty of awards to boot. Riding on this wave, Korea has pulled out all the stops for its largest character fair, currently underway in Seoul. Park Ji-won tells us more.
This adorable feline character is one of the most popular emoticons on Korea's mobile messaging application KakaoTalk. It's been downloaded more than 1 million times since it was first introduced in 2012. If cats aren't your thing, how about a sleep-loving sloth? This sloth character embodies the slow life that some of us might miss in this busy modern society we live in. And would be remiss if we didn't mention Pororo, perhaps the most widely recognizable Korean character worldwide. The children's animation has been exported to some 130 countries since it debuted in the early 2000s. Following in the lovable penguin's tracks is Larva, another successful character that now has a presence in 105 countries.
It doesn't have any language, it doesn't have any dialogue. It's the simple slapstick comedy that everybody easy to understand, so I think that's the main reason.
From instant messenger emoticons to healing icons, Korea's character industry is expanding rapidly. In just 6 years, the export volume of Korean characters has more than doubled, and from 2010 to 2012, the export volume grew at an average growth rate over 22% every year.
I've been visiting Korea since the early 1990s in the licensing business. I've really seen the industry grow and become a very mature, and it's really grown to world-class level, particularly with a lot of the innovative properties.
I think there's definitely a maturing of the licensing market here. People are more aware of the value of an effective strategic licensing program, how it could help create more awareness for their brand or their character, and how it could also help them create a significant revenue stream.
All these characters and many others can be found at the Seoul Character and Licensing Fair being held at COEX through this Sunday. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Now it's time to get a recap of this week's domestic headlines. Our Yudian joins us.
Good evening. Let's first take a look at a special series by the 조선일보, which interviewed renowned experts on Northeast Asia. Now, the purpose was to talk about the changing political dynamics in the region, particularly with the United States trying to increase its presence here. Now, you see here Jonathan Pollock, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution that specializes in East Asian international politics. Now, he says the United States is more concerned about South Korea's damaged relationship rather than with South Korea's growing relationship with China. The summit talks between Korea and China earlier this month show that the countries are edging closer together, which Pollock says is good news for the United States as it will add stability to the region. Now, he goes on to say that the deterioration of ties between Korea and Japan is of a greater concern as it poses a serious threat to the U.S., South Korea, Japan trilateral alliance. But while South Korea and Japan are drawing apart, North Korea and Japan are drawing closer. Now, here you see Kent Calder, who is the director of the Edwin O. Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies, and he says the improved ties are only temporary and meant to act as a counterbalance to stronger ties between Seoul and Beijing. Calder says there is a limit to how much closer Tokyo and Pyongyang can get. And as for Japan's larger military role in the region, Calder says that's not much of a concern. Japan's powers are overestimated, he says, as it has a rapidly aging population, which means a lot of government funds will need to be channeled there. Now, moving on over to 중앙일보, the headline here reads, any good ideas or brilliant ideas, we will give you 4% of total sales. Now, this is what LG Electronics, Korea's second largest consumer electronics company, says it began doing earlier this week. The idea is pretty much similar to what crowdsourcing websites like the US-based company Quirky do, where they take ideas from people and bring them into the market. Now, here, the paper shows the process. Now, an idea gets proposed, and when it passes through 3 qualification rounds, which include consumer testing and evaluations by LG Electronics, the idea is finally made into a product. Now, and it's not just the inventor that gets 4% of the sales, but also anyone who took part in the product development. Now, finally, moving on over to 동아일보 over here, and the headline here reads, Mobile World Cup. Now, the story shows in numbers how Koreans are shifting away from PCs and TVs and toward mobile phones when viewing major sporting events. The image here compares the percentage of those that watched the Olympics in 2012 and this year's World Cup on televisions, the mobile internet, and on their computers using their internet. Now, while the number of those that watch the major sporting events dropped for TVs and PCs, the percentage of those that use mobile internet actually rose from 18% for the Olympics 2 years ago to nearly 59% for the World Cup this year. Now, that does it for this week's look at some of the eye-catching stories from the local papers.
Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the latest weather update. Earlier today, abnormal weather conditions were experienced in Busan, including strong winds, heavy rain, and hail, which led to blackouts in some areas. At the moment, heavy rainfall advisories have been issued for both Jeollado provinces, which are getting up to 20 millimeters per hour of heavy downpours. Well, today here in Korea is Chobok, which marks the beginning of summer, and traditionally, ginseng chicken soup is eaten on this day, or better known as samgyetang, in order to get physically ready for the summer heat. So if you haven't already, it would be a good idea to head out and grab a bowl of samgyetang over the weekend, as it is shaping up to be a hot and sunny one. Through tomorrow, both Jeollado provinces as well as Gyeongsang-namdo are looking at up to 70 millimeters of precipitation, while the central regions are forecast to get between 5 to 40 millimeters. Other than that, Sunday will mostly be hot and sunny, and monsoonal fronts could move back in sometime next week. On to Saturday's readings. Seoul and Daegu soar to the low 30s, while Gwangju and Busan hit 30. On to other places. Daejeon and Myeongkimgang also peak at 30, while Jeju makes it to 29. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after 10. See you then.
All right, thank you very much, Bo-kyung, for that. And that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.